This tearful video has been viewed over 2 million times, a teenage girl sobbing for her murdered mother, sharing her raw grief with strangers on social media. But here's what makes this story take a devastating turn. The girl in that video, 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick, would later be charged with pulling the trigger herself. What happened inside a rural Georgia home on February 20th, 2025, would shatter a small community and leave investigators asking one haunting question. How could a 16-year-old girl allegedly murder the two people who had fought so hard to keep their family together? Before we examine the evidence that led to one of Georgia's most shocking arrests this year, please consider subscribing. These stories deserve to be told with the respect and attention the victims deserve. Tyus, Georgia, sits about an hour outside of Atlanta, the kind of place where everyone waves at passing cars and church parking lots overflow on Sundays. The population here was barely around 4,000. And it's here, in a modest home off a quiet country road, that Kristen and James Brock had built their second chance at life. February 19, 2025, started like any other evening in the Brock household. James, fighting for a spot on the heart transplant list, adjusted the settings on his LVAD machine, the mechanical pump keeping him alive while he waited for a donor. The device hummed constantly, a white noise the family had grown accustomed to over the months. Kristen, 38 years old with tired eyes but a warm smile, tucked in her 5-year-old daughter Jay before checking on Sarah Grace, who was watching Netflix in her room. According to what Sarah Grace would later tell investigators, her mother came in acting silly, using a deep voice to say goodnight, the kind of playful moment that seems insignificant until it becomes the last. Through the door, James called out, "I love you," to his stepdaughter. She didn't open the door to hug him back. That detail would haunt her in the coming weeks. What happened next depends on whose account you believe. Sarah Grace claims she heard nothing unusual that night except for James's ELVAD alarm going off, something that happened frequently enough that the family barely registered it anymore. The machine could beep for a dozen reasons: blood pressure fluctuations, battery warnings, positioning issues. It had become the soundtrack to their lives. But 5-year-old Jay tells a different story. In forensic interviews conducted with child specialists, she said she heard the gunshots, clear as day, the sound that changed everything. At approximately 6:30 in the morning on February 20th, Jay padded barefoot down the hallway and pushed open her parents' bedroom door. The scene she discovered was something no child should ever witness. Both Kristen and James were in their bed, unresponsive, blood pooling on the pillows. The little girl ran to her older sister's room, shaking her awake. Sarah Grace made the 911 call at 6:42 a.m. When Carroll County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene 12 minutes later, they found no signs of forced entry. The back door stood slightly ajar, not kicked in, not jimmied open, just open. Inside the master bedroom, Kristen Brock lay on her side of the bed, 2 gunshot wounds visible. James was beside her, also shot twice. The LVAD machine continued its mechanical rhythm, its alarms now mixing with the chaos of first responders rushing through the house.
Tonight, police are still looking for the person or people responsible for gunning down a couple inside their Carrollton home. The Carroll County Sheriff's Office says deputies found the husband and wife early Thursday morning. Our Chase Howell is in the newsroom tonight after talking with the couple's family. And Chase, there were actually kids inside the house when all of this happened. Do they have any idea here why someone would do this?
They don't. I mean, there was nothing taken from the home. There wasn't any forced entry. And according to the family, they had no enemies.
To understand how we got here, we need to go back, way back. Kristen and Daniel Patrick divorced in 2019 after years of marriage that produced 2 children, Sarah Grace and her younger brother Daniel Jr., nicknamed Donnie. The divorce wasn't amicable. Court documents paint a picture of a family in crisis, with custody battles that would drag on for years. In 2018, Kristen had started dating James Brock. He was rough around the edges with a criminal record that included drug charges, but Kristen saw something in him worth saving. maybe because she was fighting her own demons too. That same year, both Kristen and James were arrested on drug-related charges. The court documents are damning: possession of methamphetamine, theft by receiving stolen property, possession of drug paraphernalia. For Daniel Patrick, this was the final straw. He filed for emergency custody of his children, arguing that their mother's home had become unsafe. The filing includes a disturbing allegation that Sarah Grace, then only 10 years old, could describe in detail where her mother hid drugs in the house, what the packages looked like, even the distinctive smell of methamphetamine. The Department of Family and Children's Services got involved. There were allegations that James had disciplined Donnie with a belt, leaving visible marks. Sarah Grace reportedly told her teacher she was afraid to go home. The case seemed open and shut. These children needed to be removed from a dangerous situation. But then something unexpected happened. Kristen and James got clean. By 2023, the couple had transformed their lives completely. They started attending Calvary Baptist Church regularly, where James was baptized in a ceremony that brought tears to the congregation's eyes. The video of that baptism shows a man overwhelmed with emotion being lowered into the water while his ELVAD machine's external components are carefully held above the surface by church volunteers who'd been specially trained for this moment. Meanwhile, the custody arrangement had been resolved too. Sarah Grace and Donnie were living with their mother and stepfather again, while maintaining regular visits with their biological father. The family of 5, Kristen, James, Sarah Grace, Donnie, and little Jay, seemed to have found stability at last. James's health remained precarious. The LVAD machine that kept his heart pumping required constant maintenance and monitoring. Because he was on the transplant list, he underwent mandatory drug testing every month, tests he passed consistently. The man who'd once been arrested for methamphetamine possession was now clean, sober, and fighting for every additional day with his family. Sarah Grace appeared to thrive in this environment. She was a straight-A student, active in church youth group, and by all accounts, a devoted big sister to Jay. She'd just gotten her driver's permit and was excited about getting her license. She talked about college, about becoming a teacher, about the future that stretched bright before her, which makes what happened next even more incomprehensible. Detective T.J. Rapetto of the Carroll County Sheriff's Office had worked dozens of homicides in his 23-year career, but something about this scene immediately stood out. The lack of forced entry suggested the victims knew their killer. The precision of the shots, 2 to each victim, indicated this wasn't a crime of passion, but something more calculated. The obvious first suspect was Daniel Patrick, the ex-husband. Contentious divorces that involve custody disputes are breeding grounds for violence. But Daniel had an airtight alibi. He'd been at work punching in at 5:30 a.m. at a warehouse 45 minutes away. Security footage confirmed his presence. Phone records showed his location. More importantly, when informed of his ex-wife's death, his shock appeared genuine to seasoned investigators who'd seen their share of crocodile tears. "I asked them immediately," Daniel would later say. "Is Sarah Grace okay? Is Donnie okay? That's all I cared about." The next theory involved James's past. As a former drug dealer with a felony record, he couldn't legally own firearms, a restriction the court had explicitly reinforced during his plea deal. But enemies from that life don't always respect legal boundaries. Could this have been a revenge killing? A debt collection gone wrong? Investigators pulled James's phone records, financial statements, and interviewed dozens of associates from his past life. They found nothing. By all accounts, James had completely severed ties with that world when he got clean. His focus was on staying alive long enough to get a new heart and watch his daughter grow up. Then there were the inconsistencies in Sarah Grace's story. In the immediate aftermath of her parents' murders, Sarah Grace did something that would later become central to the investigation. She turned to social media. Within hours of the bodies being discovered, She was posting on TikTok. "I can't do this without my mom," she wrote over a video of herself crying.
In this one, she writes, "I can't do this without my mom."
"I feel like I'm in a horror movie that never ends," read another caption. Still no answers. "I'm so confused on how someone could have done this." For investigators, this behavior raised eyebrows. Grief manifests differently in everyone, especially teenagers who've grown up documenting their lives online. But there was something performative about these posts that felt off. She was engaging with comments, responding to questions about the case, even providing details about the crime scene that hadn't been released to the public. When one commenter asked what weapon was used, Sarah Grace replied with specifics. When another suggested it must have been someone who knew the family, she responded, "Most definitely was, since they knew the house." But it was her outreach to true crime content creators that really caught investigators' attention. Sarah Grace didn't just post about her grief. She actively DM'd popular TikTok accounts that covered murder cases, asking them to feature her parents' story. "Please cover this case," she wrote to one creator with over 1 million followers. "My parents deserve justice." When that creator later made a video about the murders, Sarah Grace commented, "Thank you for spreading awareness."
She messaged me back on June 3rd and just said, "Search up Brock case." So I said, "Brock Turner? Brock who?" She said, "Kristen and James Brock. Hold on. They're my parents." And out of nowhere, a random Thursday night in February, someone came in my house with me and my 5-year-old sister, and my parents left them for me and my little sister to wake up to.
Former FBI agent Tracy Walder, consulted about the case, offered a chilling perspective. "In this age of social media fame, I wonder if she did this to become TikTok and crime podcast famous. These people become remembered forever. They shouldn't be, but they are." February 27th, 2025. Calvary Baptist Church was standing room only. The entire community of Tyus had come to pay their respects to Kristen and James Brock. 2 matching caskets sat at the front of the sanctuary, surrounded by flowers and photographs of happier times. Sarah Grace had asked to speak. Her father, Daniel, had given permission, knowing his daughter needed to say goodbye. What followed was a eulogy that would later be scrutinized word by word.
"I just wanted to say goodbye to my mama and Jamie since we never got the chance to. I was so used to you guys always being here to the point that I never once thought to imagine y'all not being here. I didn't have a single clue how much I needed y'all until now. For James, thank you for all the life lessons you taught me and for being the best bonus dad ever. Your heart will finally be healed in heaven and neither of y'all will be in any pain anymore. Although that gives me so much comfort, your fight was not supposed to end there. And for my mother, everything we went through does not define what kind of person or what kind of mother you were."
She started strong, talking about her mother's laugh and James's determination to live despite his failing heart. She shared memories of family dinners, of movie nights, of the ordinary moments that now seemed precious. The congregation wept openly. But it was how she ended that would later draw scrutiny. "Jamie and Mama would have thanked y'all too. I love you guys and so do they. I'm sorry." That final apology hung in the air. Sorry for crying? Sorry for taking up time? Or sorry for something much darker? Her father maintains it meant nothing. She says sorry for everything. You can sneeze on her and she'll apologize for being in the way. That's just who she is. But investigators heard something different in those 2 words. Guilt has a way of seeping out, even when we try to contain it. For 4 months, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office worked methodically through the evidence, transforming their small department into a round-the-clock investigation unit. Detective T.J. Repetto, leading the case, had called in favors from agencies across Georgia. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit provided profiles. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's crime lab fast-tracked DNA samples. Private forensic laboratories were contracted when the state labs were backed up. This wasn't just another case for Carroll County. This was the case that would define careers, destroy a family, and leave a community questioning everything they thought they knew about the people next door. They processed DNA samples from every surface in that house: doorknobs, light switches, the gun that was recovered at the scene, bed sheets, pillowcases. The blood spatter patterns were analyzed and reanalyzed, with experts brought in from Atlanta to verify the trajectories. They reconstructed timelines down to the minute, using cell tower pings, smart home data from the family's devices, and even the LVAD machine's internal memory, which recorded every alarm, every adjustment, every moment James Brock's mechanical heart kept pumping that night. The investigators conducted over 100 interviews, starting with the inner circle and working outward like ripples on a pond. They talked to church members who saw the family every Sunday, teachers who knew Sarah Grace as a model student, neighbors who heard nothing unusual that night. They executed dozens of search warrants for social media accounts, text messages, email records, browser histories. Every digital footprint Sarah Grace had left in her 16 years of life was scrutinized. They combed through thousands of pages of data, looking for that one thread that would unravel everything. During those 4 months, Sarah Grace continued living with her biological father, Daniel Patrick. She graduated high school with honors. She posted on TikTok about missing her mother. She went to therapy. She acted, by all accounts, like a grieving teenager trying to piece her life back together. Investigators watched from a distance, noting every move, every post, every interaction. They were building something, but nobody knew exactly what. On July 5th, 2025, investigators made their move. They called Daniel Patrick with what seemed like good news. They had some items of Sarah Grace's they were ready to return. Her phone, which had been taken for analysis, some jewelry that had been in the house. Could she come to the station to collect them? It seemed routine, even considerate. Daniel drove his daughter to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, probably telling her it would be quick, that they'd grab her things and maybe get lunch after. What followed was anything but routine. The moment they entered the interview room, the tone shifted. This wasn't about returning property. This was an interrogation, and Sarah Grace was the target. For 4 hours, investigators pressed her on every detail of that night. They showed her crime scene photos, not the sanitized ones shown to juries, but the raw, brutal images of Kristen and James Brock in their bed, blood pooling on white sheets, their faces frozen in death. Daniel Patrick watched his daughter crumble as investigators pushed harder, their questions becoming accusations.
If they say they have a mountain of evidence, that folder was pretty thin. At the end of it, they started throwing pictures of her parents at us, her stepdad and her mom, deceased with gunshot wounds.
But she wasn't free. Not really. The investigators had what they needed. Sarah Grace's reactions, her words, the tiny inconsistencies that had emerged under pressure. They let her leave that day, but Daniel knew something had shifted. He could see it in their eyes. His daughter had gone from witness to suspect, and there was no going back. 3 days passed, 3 days of sleepless nights, of Sarah Grace barely eating, of Daniel fielding calls from extended family asking what was happening. Then, on July 8th, his phone rang. It wasn't a request this time. It was an ultimatum. Turn Sarah Grace in by 10 in the morning, or the U.S. Marshals would come for her. That same morning, Sheriff's investigator Repetto held a press conference that would send shockwaves through Georgia and beyond. Standing behind a podium, flanked by American flags and the seal of Carroll County, he delivered the news that nobody had seen coming. Today, we can confirm that an arrest has been made. Kristen Brock's 17-year-old daughter, Sarah Grace Patrick, has been taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. The evidence, Repetto explained, was overwhelming. Not circumstantial, not theoretical, but what he called mountains of physical and digital evidence. Digital evidence that placed her at the scene during the murders when she claimed to be asleep. Forensic evidence that contradicted her version of events in ways that couldn't be explained away. The investigation, he said, had revealed she was the only person who could have committed these crimes. But what exactly was this mountain of evidence? The prosecution has been strategically tight-lipped, building their case behind closed doors. However, sources familiar with the investigation have suggested several key pieces that led to Sarah Grace's arrest. Cell phone data allegedly showed her phone was active during the time she claimed to be asleep, with searches and messages that painted a different picture of that morning. Gunshot residue tests reportedly yielded results inconsistent with her story of being in another room when the shots were fired. The trajectory analysis of the bullets suggested the shooter knew exactly where the victims would be positioned in bed, firing with a precision that suggested familiarity with their sleeping positions. Perhaps most damning was the testimony of 5-year-old Jay, who heard the gunshots clearly from her room down the hall, while Sarah Grace, whose room was actually closer to her parents' bedroom, claimed to have heard nothing but the LVAD alarm. Investigators found this discrepancy impossible to reconcile. How could a child further away hear what a teenager closer to the scene could not? There was also the matter of security footage from neighbors' cameras. While grainy and distant, the footage showed no vehicles arriving or leaving during the crucial window when the murders occurred. No mysterious intruder fleeing into the night. No unfamiliar cars parked nearby. The killer, investigators concluded, was already in the house. Today, Sarah Grace Patrick sits in a juvenile detention facility, though she's being charged as an adult due to the severity of the crimes. At 17, she faces the possibility of life in prison with parole possible after 30 years. The death penalty, which Georgia reserves for its most heinous crimes, is off the table due to her age at the time of the alleged murders. She would be 47 years old before she could even be considered for release. Her family remains bitterly divided. On one side, her grandfather Dennis Nolan stands firm in his belief of her innocence. She's innocent, he insists in every interview. They were pressured to make an arrest. The community wanted someone to blame, and they picked the easiest target. This is premature. My granddaughter is not a killer. Her father, Daniel Patrick, echoes this sentiment with even more force. Somebody assassinated them, and it was not my daughter. She wouldn't hurt a fly. She's never been in a fight in her life. She's never even raised her voice in anger. But on the other side are those who've seen the evidence, who've watched the investigation unfold, who know things the public doesn't yet know. Investigators paint a vastly different picture. They describe a teenager who may have been struggling with demons nobody recognized, the trauma of her early childhood, witnessing drug use, experiencing the chaos of her parents' arrests, being removed from her home by child services. These experiences leave marks that don't always show on the surface. They theorize about a girl who learned to present one face to the world while hiding another entirely. The question that haunts everyone is motive. Why would a 16-year-old girl kill the parents who had finally gotten their lives together? Was it anger over rules and restrictions that came with their newfound stability? Was there fear of something, some secret, some threat, that hasn't yet come to light? Or was it something even darker, something that speaks to our modern age, a desire for the twisted fame that comes with being at the center of a true crime story? Former prosecutor Beth Karas, who's followed the case closely, offers a chilling observation. Parricide cases involving teenage girls are exceptionally rare. When they do occur, there's usually a clear history of severe abuse or diagnosed mental illness. Neither has been definitively established here, which makes this case particularly troubling. We're left looking for answers in the shadows. In 2025 alone, cases of children killing their entire families are not unheard of. Another recent example is the Clifford Hunt Jr. case, a chilling story that we're about to uncover. Did you know that family annihilation cases where the son becomes the murderers are extremely rare? And yet, 2025 has seen several shocking incidents where sons ended up killing their entire families. What makes tragedies like this even more disturbing is that in many true crime stories, the families caught in these horrors are the ones we often perceive as happy, stable, and perfectly normal. They look like the last people who would ever be touched by violence. So the question is, what forces someone to destroy the very people they're supposed to love and protect? Let's break down one of the most recent cases of Sun family annihilation and the chilling factors that may have led to it.
I know they were loved by everyone who knew them. They were big in the animal world. They loved their animals. Not only was this one tragedy, this was 4 tragedies all at once.
Our story really begins on January 25th, 2025, a cold Saturday morning in New Sewickley Township, Pennsylvania. Police were asked to conduct a welfare check at the Hunt residence after friends and relatives noticed that no one in the family was responding to calls or messages, something completely out of character for them. When officers arrived and stepped inside the home, they were met with a scene that immediately signaled something was terribly wrong. Inside the quiet 2-story house, they found 4 members of the Hunt family, parents Michelle and Clifford, along with their teenage sons, all deceased. The officers documented everything from the placement of personal items to the condition of each room, careful not to disturb anything that could help establish the timeline of events. Suspiciously, there were no signs of forced entry, nothing indicating that anyone had broken in, and neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual the night before. And as details slowly emerged, people closest to the family struggled to process the news.
The North Sewickley Township community is still trying to process a triple murder-suicide. Authorities say Clifford Hunt Jr. shot and killed his father, Clifford, mother, Michelle, and brother, Cody.
As Chris Hoffman reports tonight, the community is trying to help the Hunts' loved ones endure.
As mentioned, the Hunts had always been seen as a warm, tight-knit household, active in their community and deeply involved in their sons' school lives. Michelle often posted photos online, family outings, pets playing in the yard, proud mom moments from school events. Clifford Sr. was described by co-workers as straightforward, hardworking, and always willing to help. Their boys were well-liked, involved, and described by teachers as polite and engaged. Despite the horrific scene discovered that morning, nothing in the Hunts' public life hinted at trouble. Cody, the younger teen, was reportedly a strong student, a member of the National Honor Society, and classmates remembered him for being polite, soft-spoken, and deeply interested in aviation. He played saxophone in the marching band and, according to people close to the family, had dreams of applying to the Air Force Academy someday. He and his mother even volunteered together at a local aviation museum, something friends described as one of their shared passions. His older brother, Clifford Jr., was remembered much the same way, low profile, polite, and never the type to cause trouble. People who knew the family said the boys grew up with structure, school, chores, pets to look after, and a household that seemed calm from the outside. Together, the brothers took on small responsibilities around the home, especially caring for the animals the family adored. Nothing about their upbringing stood out as unusual or alarming. If anything, the Hunts appeared almost completely ordinary, the kind of family you'd pass in the grocery store without a second thought. And that's exactly what makes the events that followed so unsettling. That Sunday began exactly the way it always did. A receipt printed at 8:43 in the morning showed Clifford Hunt, Sr., buying 50 pounds of grain feed, just as he had done for years. Surveillance footage captured him loading the heavy bags into his truck with the same calm, steady rhythm. Michelle had texted him earlier, reminding him to pick up extra because the family was expecting new ducks. They already kept chickens, geese, and turkeys scattered around their small property, and the new arrivals were something Michelle had been excited about all week. Neighbors later told investigators they saw Clifford out in the yard shortly after 9, tending to the animals like he did every morning. The birds were calm, the pens looked undisturbed, and nothing about the picture suggested a family on the verge of tragedy. Around mid-morning, Michelle messaged her friend Autumn about the ducks again, laughing about how the geese were already peeking through the fencing to inspect the newcomers. Her post from 2 days earlier on the Air Heritage Aviation Museum page showed the same energy. She talked proudly about Cody earning his pilot's license and mentioned how excited they both were to give tours at the upcoming air show. Also, Cody's last known movements at school painted a similar picture. Footage from Friday afternoon showed him leaving the band room with his saxophone, chatting briefly with classmates. He had just earned first chair in the wind ensemble and had met with his guidance counselor to prepare for his application to the United States Air Force Academy. Hours later, he texted a friend about finally understanding derivatives for an upcoming calculus test. Just a regular conversation between students, with no hint of fear or tension. His older brother, Clifford Jr., had walked those same halls the year before. Though quieter and more reserved than Cody, teachers remembered him as bright, polite, and steady. He had been accepted to Penn State but chose to stay home for a year to save money and work locally. Friends said he spent most of his time helping around the property, working on his car, or spending quiet evenings with the family. It's also important to note that both Michelle and Clifford Sr. had valid hunting licenses, just like the boys, a long-standing family tradition. Friends described them as responsible and devoted to the outdoor lifestyle. Social media posts showed family hunting trips, 3 generations dressed in camouflage and smiling proudly. A home inspection from the previous year noted their firearms were stored correctly in a locked basement safe. Everything about the hunts suggested a family that followed the rules, stayed close to one another, and lived a steady, predictable life. And yet, by Sunday night, that entire image would shatter. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came at 9:27 p.m., when the dispatcher's console lit up with an incoming 911 call. Investigators later confirmed that the faint, broken voice on the line belonged to 16-year-old Cody Hunt. His words were barely formed, strained, trembling, and almost swallowed by the panic around him. "Help. Please. Shot." He fought to say the address clearly enough for the dispatcher to understand. The audio itself is extremely disturbing and heartbreaking to hear, so we decided not to include it here. The dispatcher tried to keep him speaking, asking how many people were injured. After a long pause, Cody managed to whisper so soft it was nearly lost in the recording. "Everyone. Whole family." At 9:38 p.m., Chief Jeff Bexay arrived at the Hunt's home with backup seconds behind him. His body camera footage, later reviewed as part of the investigation, showed him stepping out of his cruiser, weapon drawn, calling into the house for any response. Silence. The front door was cracked open, as if someone had tried to leave or call for help and never made it further. When Chief Bexay pushed it open, his flashlight cut through the darkness and immediately revealed a motionless figure on the floor. A few steps in, the full scene came into view. Multiple victims, visible gunshot wounds, weapons lying in separate areas of the home, and blood evidence that made it clear the violence unfolded rapidly. Both parents were already gone. The 2 boys were still alive, but only barely. Paramedics entered once the scene was secured. Cody and his older brother, 19-year-old Clifford Jr., were found with critical head injuries. Flight crews were alerted immediately, and logs show helicopters departing the area at 10:12 p.m. and arriving at UPMC Presbyterian at 10:31 p.m. Hours later, District Attorney Nate Bible delivered the first official update. Based on medical findings and the placement of the weapons, early indicators suggested that the older son may have been the last person alive before police entered. Investigators were careful to stress that the full timeline would require extensive forensic work. Back at the Hunt residence, detectives began piecing together the timeline. One of the first things noted was how ordinary everything had been just hours earlier. Fresh feed bags still sat unopened near the barn. Michelle's phone was on the kitchen counter with her message thread open, the one where she'd told her friend she was excited about the new ducks. Clifford Sr.'s truck keys were in their usual bowl by the door. A to-do list on the fridge still had Monday's tasks written neatly in Michelle's handwriting. Nothing about the home suggested tension, a fight, or even a raised voice from earlier that day. The official documents record Cody Hunt's time of death as 11:43 p.m. Sunday night, just over an hour after arriving at the trauma center. The attending trauma surgeon's report, filed at 12:17 a.m. Monday morning, detailed the extraordinary efforts made to save the 16-year-old's life. Despite emergency craniotomy surgery and aggressive intervention protocols, the extent of his head trauma proved insurmountable. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the lead trauma surgeon, noted in her official report, patient demonstrated remarkable vital signs persistence given injury severity. The fact that this young man managed to place a coherent 911 call with these injuries represents an extraordinary act of determination. Her notes emphasize that Cody's actions, maintaining consciousness long enough to provide their address and basic information to dispatchers, had been nothing short of heroic. The medical timeline showed Cody arrived at 10:31 p.m. via life flight, was rushed directly to operating room 3, and underwent immediate surgical intervention at 10:39 p.m. Neurosurgeon Dr. James Chen's operative notes described attempting to relieve intracranial pressure and control hemorrhaging for over an hour. At 11:43 p.m., despite all efforts, cardiac arrest occurred. Resuscitation attempts continued for 12 additional minutes before time of death was officially called at 11:55 p.m., though the legal declaration referenced 11:43 p.m. as the moment of cardiac cessation. Clifford Jr. survived longer, remaining on advanced life support systems until Monday at 4:17 a.m. The medical team's extensive notes indicate multiple attempts at stabilization through the night. Dr. Martinez documented consulting with 3 separate neurology specialists via telemedicine, seeking any possible intervention that might improve his prognosis. Each consultation reached the same conclusion. His injuries were incompatible with meaningful recovery. The neurological testing results, completed at 2:45 a.m. Monday, showed no detectable brain activity across multiple examinations. The electroencephalogram readings were flat. Pupillary response was absent. Brainstem reflexes showed no function. The decision to remove life support came after extensive consultation with the hospital's ethics committee and attempts to reach extended family members who might provide guidance on the 19-year-old's wishes. These medical records presented investigators with a crucial paradox that would haunt the case. If Clifford Jr. was indeed the perpetrator, as preliminary evidence suggested, his survival for those additional 5 hours meant he could have potentially provided answers. But his injuries prevented any possibility of communication from the moment he arrived. He never regained consciousness, never responded to stimuli, taking any explanation for that Sunday night's events with him. The attending physician's trajectory analysis report, completed by Dr. Chen and forensic pathologist Dr. Robert Williams, noted something significant. The angle and powder residue patterns of Clifford Jr.'s wound were consistent with self-infliction, specifically what forensic experts term a contact wound. Meanwhile, Cody's injury pattern, including the absence of close-range powder burns and the wound angle, suggested he was shot by another party from a distance of at least 3 feet. This medical assessment aligned with the investigators' developing theory, but couldn't definitively prove sequence or intent. The toxicology reports, expedited due to the case's nature, came back Monday afternoon showing no evidence of alcohol, illegal drugs, or suspicious pharmaceutical substances in any family member's system. Clifford Jr.'s blood showed only trace amounts of caffeine, no antidepressants, no anti-anxiety medications, no substances that might explain a sudden break with reality. What remained unexplained? Why a 19-year-old with no documented history of violence, mental health treatment, professional intervention, or family conflict would commit such an act? What's really heartbreaking about this is the fact that Cody's phone showed intense activity beginning at 9:25 p.m. 5 failed attempts to call 911 logged in just 2 minutes. The call failures were likely due to his injuries affecting his ability to properly dial the 3 digits. His determination to get help despite critical wounds showed in the phone's motion sensors. The device repeatedly dropped and was picked up again. He finally succeeded in connecting at 9:27 p.m. That 2-minute call, though difficult for dispatchers to understand, provided the only reason emergency services arrived when they did. Between 9:20 p.m. and 9:25 p.m., Cody's phone showed he'd tried to text 3 contacts, his girlfriend, his best friend, and his uncle, but none of these messages were successfully composed or sent. The phone's screen had blood evidence that would later match Cody's DNA, suggesting he was already injured while attempting to communicate. Clifford Jr.'s phone told a dramatically different story. No outgoing calls or texts after 7 p.m. Sunday. His search history from earlier that day showed nothing concerning. Weather reports for flying conditions at 6 p.m., Pittsburgh Steelers score updates at 5:30 p.m., a recipe for grilled chicken marinade at 4 p.m. His last social media activity was liking a friend's photo at 6:45 p.m., a picture from a colleague's birthday party he hadn't attended. His Spotify showed he'd been listening to classic rock until 6:52 p.m. when the music stopped mid-song. But investigators discovered something unusual that raised immediate red flags. Clifford Jr. had deleted his entire text message history with a friend named Marcus Thompson at 6:58 p.m. Sunday. This deletion was deliberate and complete, not just clearing a conversation thread, but permanently removing all traces. Thompson, interviewed Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., said they'd been discussing normal topics: work schedules at the local warehouse where both were employed, a planned fishing trip for the following weekend, complaints about their supervisor. Nothing unusual at all, Thompson insisted. We were literally talking about whether to use live bait or lures. Why delete such mundane conversations minutes before a family tragedy? Thompson had no explanation, and recovery attempts on the deleted data proved unsuccessful. On Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., District Attorney Nate Bible held his final press conference in the courthouse's main briefing room. Flanked by Chief Becks and lead investigator Detective Raymond Torres, Bible carefully laid out the forensic evidence that supported the determination of triple murder-suicide. The packed room of reporters and community members sat in stunned silence as he methodically presented the findings. After extensive investigation involving multiple agencies, forensic analysis, and careful reconstruction of events, Bible stated, reading from prepared remarks, "We have concluded that Clifford Hunt Jr. shot his parents and younger brother before turning a weapon on himself. The case will be officially closed as a murder-suicide, though the motive might never be fully understood." Bible explained the weapons evidence in detail. Several weapons were taken from the scene. We're still sorting out exactly which weapons were used on whom, trying to piece together a precise timeline of what happened in those terrible minutes. The final ballistics report would take weeks to complete, but the basic conclusion was clear. No outside party was involved, no forced entry, no robbery, no one else was being sought. Detective Torres presented the investigative timeline, noting that everything pointed to the violence beginning around 9:20 p.m. and ending within minutes. The absence of defensive wounds suggested the family members were caught completely off guard. The pattern of injuries indicated Clifford Jr. had moved through the house systematically. The gun safe in the basement had been opened with its combination, known to all family members, rather than forced. The prosecutor emphasized the tragedy's incomprehensible nature and its impact on the community. This family was well-known, well-loved in their community. There were no warning signs that anyone could point to, no history of domestic violence, no documented mental health struggles, no suicide ideation expressed to friends or family. Sometimes terrible things happen without explanation, and we're left to grieve without understanding why. The memorial service, held Friday, December 1st at noon at First Presbyterian Church of Sewickley, exceeded capacity with over 500 attendees. 4 closed caskets, draped with white roses, were arranged at the altar. The program featured a collection of family photos spanning 2 decades, hunting trips with 3 generations in camouflage, Michelle and Cody volunteering at the museum, Clifford Sr. teaching his sons to fish, family Christmases around a decorated tree. Riverside High School established the Cody Hunt Memorial Scholarship for students pursuing aviation careers, ensuring his dream of flight would inspire others even after his own dreams ended too soon. The initial endowment of $25,000 came from community donations within the first week. The school also retired his saxophone chair in the wind ensemble, placing a memorial plaque where he'd sat as first chair. The Hunt family tragedy stands as a stark reminder that sometimes violence erupts without warning signs, without explanation, without the possibility of prevention. 4 lives ended in minutes on a Sunday night that began like any other, leaving a community to grapple with unanswerable questions and profound loss. And moments like these force entire communities to pause, to reconsider the quiet struggles people may carry, to recognize that even in towns where everyone knows each other's names, pain can hide in plain sight. That families who look steady, loving, and secure from the outside can still be vulnerable to pressures no one ever sees. So the question becomes, what do we do with this kind of tragedy? How do we, as a community, learn from something that offers no clear lesson, no obvious pattern, no easy answer? Maybe it starts with paying closer attention to the people around us, not just when they seem troubled, but even when everything appears fine, checking in, even when there's no crisis, normalizing conversations about mental health and emotional stress, especially for young men who often hide their struggles behind silence, making it easier for families to access support without fear of judgment, and perhaps most importantly, creating a culture where asking for help isn't seen as weakness, but as a necessary part of being human. Because if there's one painful truth this case teaches us, it's that silence can be deadly, isolation can be invisible. And sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens.